Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more History Matters. This time, wanted to do a short one, not a 10-minute history. This time, how did the world react to the American Civil War? I'm genuinely curious about it because you don't really hear much about it. Especially as an American. I mean, you kind of hear about the supposed French and British kind of wanting to lend some support to the CSA, the Confederates, because the Confederates produced cotton, and we're taught that a little bit in American history. On the American side of things, we're kind of taught that a little bit, that the Union did perhaps fear some intervention, and I personally believe that the shifting of calling the Civil War from a war of just states rebelling. Obviously, the war was fundamentally always about states' rights to own slaves. Uh, it was always about slavery first and foremost. That I think in every single state that's seceded, I believe the first line, or it is mentioned pretty much within the first paragraph of their secession letters, is that they are seceding for slaves. They mention slavery. Every single one mentions their right to own slaves. So literally go look it up yourself. The secession letters are easily Googleable. Anyways, but yeah, kind of taught that the Union somewhat feared British and possibly French intervention on the side of the CSA, or at least lending some support to the CSA. Hence why, I mean, of course, one of the reasons why they put the blockade on the entire CSA is to cut off CSA supply, but then also, try and dissuade British and foreign intervention on the side of the Confederates. But then, as I was saying earlier, I kind of always viewed it as the shifting from the war of kind of about unionizing the Union, into more of a war on slavery, on ending slavery. That shift, because that it was not about a war of ending slavery. Abraham Lincoln did not necessarily, when he became president, was not going to end slavery. He was simply, I think, the furthest he wanted to go, at least in the beginning, was he just wanted to stop. Essentially, by this point, the 1860s, the abolitionist movement, while certainly many were wanting to end slavery outright, but without fighting a war, many felt that the way to really end slavery was to contain it within the South, just not let it expand anymore. That's essentially what I think, common ideal was, and then just have slavery phase out is what they were kind of wanting to do. And also, for long before this, slavery was thought it would be phased out because it was pretty expensive to own a slave. But then the cotton gin gets made, and suddenly cotton is a hell of a lot cheaper to produce. So then, boom, slavery skyrockets up again. But yes, it was not a war on slavery initially. I mean, it was not a war to end slavery initially, but then it became a war to end slavery. If that wording makes sense. That's how I've always kind of viewed the Civil War and its progression. Pretty much once Lincoln makes the Emancipation Proclamation, even though that is only taking away slaves from the states that rebelled, and the slave states that stayed within the Union would still technically be allowed to own slaves. That's when that shift. I think that's when the shift happens. It becomes a war to end slavery, and that kind of, in my view, gets the other Western nations, other nations that were possibly looking to support the Confederates, because cheap cotton, kind of go, oh, this would be a political nightmare to get involved in if we sided with the ones that are still keeping slaves, right? That's kind of how I've always looked at it. I could be wrong. I am not a Civil War historian. So yeah, that was a long 4-minute rant. As long as the video, let's go ahead and just dive in.
It shouldn't surprise you that when the American Civil War broke out, it was pretty big news all over the world. But how did the rest of the world react?
What did that say, amateurs? Come on. Come on. Am I pressing the wrong button? No, I'm not pressing the wrong button. Lincoln, what were we over amateurs, Chinese ambassador?
But how did the rest of the world react to the American Civil War? And did they plan to do anything about it? So before starting, it's
Siam offered Lincoln elephants, I believe.
Important to know that the USA wasn't seen by many of the world's nations at this time as a major player.
No,
a rising
we were
star
not.
for certain, but the USA wasn't seen as being equal to Europe's great powers, not even Austria. As such, many leaders saw the American Civil War as being a bit of a sideshow to events in Europe at the time, like the wars in the Italian peninsula or that time that the Danish provoked Prussia into a war. Europe's major players sent observers to the USA to see what tactics and technologies were being used, and they were, frankly, not impressed with the quality of warring going on.
This is a common theme. I've said this before about American military history. I took a semester that was about American military history. And you know, I always knew our military wasn't the greatest. But my god, how the fuck have we won wars? After I took that class, I'm surprised that we've won any wars. Our military has largely been incompetent. Like, I think the only time we have ever had competent military leaders was during World War II and then during the Gulf War in the 90s. I think that is about the only time we have had truly competent and what you could say good military leaders. Now, of course, Lee and Grant come up here, and they are definitely better than the American average. And you could argue that they are pretty good generals on a world scale. However, I still would never put them in the top 10. I don't even think I would put them in the top 50 generals. And I am biased towards General Grant. I like General Grant. I think he fought the Civil War quite spectacular. Fuck General Lee, he's a slave-owning racist. Yeah, there's my thoughts.
As for reaction, starting with the USA's neighbour to the south, Mexico, its government's initial reaction was one of awkward silence. It had just finished its own civil war, and due to its previous war with the USA, there was no love lost. Not that it had much time to think about it, since in late 1861 the French invaded, and so they'd spend the rest of the war having their own problems. As for the north, Canada was a series of British imperial domains at this point, and as such its foreign policy was determined in London. That said, the people of Canada were firmly in the camp of the Union, and many thousands of volunteers went south to fight against the Confederacy. Whereas to the British, the American
shout out Canada. Homies to the north.
The Civil War was seen as a surprise and one which complicated Britain's foreign policy. You see, Britain imported a lot of cotton from the now Confederate States, and given that many parts of the country financially depended on them, the British were keen to see the war end quickly for
think of the money.
Economic reasons. Now, this didn't have to be a Union win, and British shipyards produced several warships for the Confederate States. The Confederacy hoped that Britain would recognise its independence, which would likely lead France to do the same and would strengthen its position diplomatically. Britain never did this though, because it didn't want the United States to invade Canada. Wars were expensive, and the overwhelming majority of the British public supported the Union, especially when the cause of the war moved from restoring the Union to abolishing slavery.
Yes! That's what I said at the beginning of the video! Let's go!
And over the years, many thousands of people living in the British Isles, overwhelmingly Irish, went to the US to fight for the Union. Thus, the Confederate...
And because of a small famine that had been... When was the famine? 1850? Or was that towards the 1860s? Oh, I'm forgetting the timeline of the Irish famine. Fuck.
...got little help. As for the French, its reaction was the same as the Austrians, that these developments were a welcome surprise. It allowed Franco-Austrian intervention in Mexico so that Maximilian Habsburg could be placed on the throne there to increase their influence in the New World, and also to give back the money that Mexico was refusing to pay its creditors. Both nations had unofficial contact with the Confederacy over mutual recognition, yet neither France nor Austria did anything because they knew it would mean war with the United States. Whereas Prussia's reaction to the outbreak of the Civil War wasn't one of shock, but that it brought with it opportunity. Despite being disappointed with the quality of their troops and tactics, Prussia favoured the Union. Prussia was itself a very conservative state, but its leadership knew that acting against the Union would negatively impact its image amongst the very pro-Union German-speaking world, which, as you'll know, it was trying to unite, and so by pushing itself as a firm ally of abolitionism and the Union,
slavery is lame, cub, let's go!
Prussia's image amongst the German-speaking world could be improved with very little effort. And what about Russia? American leadership was bolstered by a large Russian fleet sailing to their coast, which they hoped would help them blockade the Confederacy, but fun fact, No, the
Oh.
fleet was actually there to stop itself from being caged up in the Baltic Sea in case of war with Britain, as tensions between the two were high. Tsar Alexander II was an outspoken ally of Lincoln and pushed for the total destruction of the Confederacy.
Yeah, let's go, Tsar Alexander.
And as
Homie.
for the Ottoman reaction, they were overwhelmingly pro-Union. They signed a trade deal with the Union, banned Confederate ships from their waters, and also made a ton of money since
Let's fucking go, Ottomans. Cash money.
they were the second best source of cotton for European markets and their main competitor had just been blockaded. All in all, the world's reaction to
Huh. Let's go, Ottomans. Yeah.
the outbreak of the Civil War was one of initial surprise, followed by it asking itself, how can this benefit me? I hope you enjoyed.
Sounds like the Europeans. Oh, this was a nice, enjoyable short video. I loved this. I hope you guys enjoyed too. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.